Welcome back now. South Africa's unemployment rate hit new record highs of 34.9% in the third quarter of 2021, pushing the numbers of unemployed people beyond crisis level. Now, as the country's higher learning institutions continue to churn out fresh graduates to flood the ranks, the situation necessitates a new innovative and futuristic thinking to open up opportunities to alleviate the crisis. And joining us now virtually to discuss this are Strategy Director at Yellowwood, Ntombizamasala Hlophe, as well as President for the World Council for Graduates and Chairperson for the South African Council for Graduates, Thamsanqa Maqubela. Thanks so much to both of you. Happy New Year and welcome to Morning Live.
Compliments, Sakina, and your viewers. Thank you very much for hosting us.
Now, Thamsanqa, I'm going to start with you. The extended definition of unemployment says that the country is currently sitting at around 46% of unemployment. And that means that almost half of the South African nation is not working. Now, that is a crisis in any language. But what needs to be done?
Thank you very much, Sakina, for this hard-hitting question right at the beginning of the year. It is indeed a very valid question, and we need to answer it not only here, but beyond this interview. We need to change, we need to train the attitude of South Africans. The manner in which we've been educating our people has got to go through very urgent and serious holistic change and overhaul. That needs to give us an attitude that wants to win, an attitude of fearlessness, to be able to produce and to manufacture, not just to seek an employment and stand in queues looking for a job. That is what we need to change, not only at universities, Sakina. 1.2 million graduates are unemployed. And that is a figure that has moved from 700,000 pre-COVID. Right now, we're sitting at 1.2 million. We cannot have graduates who would also say, I don't know what to do, I'm unemployed. Whereas so many people with less than a metric or with metric are looking up to the graduates for solutions.
Ntombizamasala, the government has acknowledged that the current strategies need to be drastically scaled in order to address the extent of the problem. Given those facts, given what we've just also heard from Thamsanqa, which are also things that we have known, but what are the choices that we have, not just in terms of trying to address the problem or scale it, but also in terms of the career choices and skills that are needed in South Africa at this point in time to be relevant, not just to the job market, but to actually address these issues?
Yeah. Sakina, I think one of the most important things that perhaps as South Africans we need to consider is that our exploration of employment has often been very linear, right? We look to educate, from educating, we look to some form of private sector or public sector formal employment. What we don't necessarily think about is income earning, right? And when you look at the countries who have managed to change their strategies, primarily a lot of what they do is that the young people focus on different forms of income generation rather than just simply formal employment. And I can appreciate that for South Africans, we do have increased pressure because we want the security of long-term job employment. We want the kind of stability that comes with those kinds of jobs. But if you look at the fact that I think almost about 60% of Gen Z in the US is already in entrepreneurial jobs, right? They're looking at this idea of freelancing their time, of looking for different ways to source income. And the consequence for them is that what it's doing is that it's opening the minds of young people about the idea of what income earning looks like in the future and what job definitions are. So we typically are still expecting, for example, a graduate who has studied an economics degree to go and apply that trade in an economics industry, when potentially what we need to start thinking about is what is a set of skills, which industry is in highest demand for that skill, and therefore how do I start to go about deploying that as a career choice. And I think that those are some of the things that we have to start being quite open-minded about. And I think why that's helpful is because it means that 1.2 million graduates that Thamsanqa was referring to potentially have the ability to explore beyond the limited or bottleneck industries that they're in. If the fastest growing industry in South Africa currently is banking and financials, followed by ICT and telecoms, that's not actually necessarily as a consequence of there being jobs in that industry, but actually as a consequence of how much we've had to move towards those industries in the past year. And I think that's what we have to start thinking about, is where are there problems that people can solve? And if we can start thinking about problem solving, young people may be better placed to start thinking about where can they start to generate practice that can earn them income differently. And I think that's what we might need to start to think in a different way.
Thamsanqa, I mean, as young people are the hardest hit group in this particular crisis, coming out of tertiary institutions, one would imagine that everyone is hopeful. But what is waiting for these new graduates out there? And also, what should those going into institutions of higher learning be thinking about and considering right now?
I think Ms. Hlophe has coined it quite well to say that we need to look at the earning opportunities. That is why at the World Council for Graduates, we're talking about entrepreneurs, EARN. Those are kind of entrepreneurs that we need to groom from as early as age 7. So to talk only about them going to university would be a bit too late. So we need to catch them from the Department of Basic Education and make sure that they see opportunities. I see the greatest opportunities that we have today, it's in the car wash business. Who would have thought about that? ICT, it is propelling us through the artificial intelligence to enter into careers where we would have driverless cars. We think that is too far in the future. Not at all. It is just around the corner. So to have a driver's license, yes, it's important, but it's going to be obsolete very soon because I'm going to use a car that is driverless. I'm going to use a car that doesn't use a fuel or any form of petrol or diesel. As a result, what it is that I need to be able to make sure that your car mechanics are also car mechanics that are futuristic in their nature. Car washes, makeup artists, food technologies, making sure that we eat well. People live quite longer, Sakina. So it is not only talking about those that are leaving universities and those that are coming into. The curriculum needs to focus on opportunities. People are living longer. People care about their health. People want to eat green. We want to make sure that we find solutions for global warming. And that is where the opportunities are. And that is an opportunity for an African child to be able to go out there and explore and bring solutions not just for Africa, but for the rest of the world. I believe that this is an opportunity we need to catch with both hands and not see it as a threat and not see ourselves as victims of the manufacturing that has gone wrong from the West. But we must see this as an opportunity, as a game changer for Africa to start channeling solutions that will remedy and bring down the effects, the negative effects of global warming.
But are we thinking that way in Ntombizamasala? If listening to what both you and Thamsanqa have been saying, which is absolutely spot on, if we look at the cohort of young people going into the workplace, be it entrepreneurial, be it into the formal sector, be it also into institutions of tertiary learning or higher education, are they actually looking at where the world and where South Africa is headed at the moment? Do the numbers and the courses into which they are enrolling actually show us that they are aware and cognizant of the state of play?
In truth, Sakina, and I say this as a graduate of the South African education system, we're not, right? If I just reflect on my own educational experience, very little time was expended towards creating the idea of what would the world become, right? While being educated, where am I heading towards? Very little discussion is had around that. And I think in truth, we still spend far too much time speaking about the state of large sectors. When we look at unemployment factors, even when we look at retrenchment figures, we're very, very much obsessed with historical industries. We're not discussing what kind of world do we want to create? What kind of participation do we want South Africa to have in a new world? I really love using the examples of countries like India, because at a time where India was perhaps having its greatest economic performance, and also countries like China, they defined what they would do, right? When China's economic boom happened, they defined that it would come through construction. They defined that it would be through telecoms and that kind of technology industry. India did a similar thing where they looked at what skill set they actually had and they placed an immense amount of attention on that. What I find is that as South Africans, we don't have, our efforts are not congruent, right? We don't work in tandem with each other. So where government places investment is not the same place where private sector places investment, not the same place where education focuses, and certainly not the place where civil society is focused. So you find that we cover a lot of ground, but it all ends up being surface level attention. So when you look at, for example, if you look at Kenya versus the US, the way that those technology industries were built was actually initially from government investment in technology as an industry. But then private sector response and entrepreneurial response and continuing to invest in those industries, looking for ways to create unique things that the market could actually utilize, is why we have the Silicon Valley of Africa sitting in Nairobi and why we have Silicon Valley in San Francisco. So I think this idea of coordinating our efforts and being quite deliberate in saying, if it is that we have agriculture as a background, then we will be the world's #1 agricultural tech country. Then that's what we've got to put investment behind. Right now, we're being outperformed by Germany in terms of investment in technology and agriculture, and yet it's a highly contributing category to us as a country. So there's just that idea of we don't work in congruent effort with each other.
And one can perhaps push that peanut slightly further, Thamsanqa, from where Ntombizamasala leaves it, because if you look at the curricula that our students are exposed to, again, you have to ask so many questions about whether what learners and what students are being exposed to is actually going to be beneficial to them, because the reality is right now we have graduates walking South Africa's streets with qualifications and no jobs. And these problems seems to just grow as time goes by. But if you look at what happens in other countries, and Ntombizamasala speaks about what's happening in Germany, you go to a country like Switzerland, and you find that at the academic level, you have people who are in academia, they go out into the private sector, public sector, work there at the highest level, come back and teach again. We don't seem to have that sort of revolving door in our space. How is that impacting not just the job market, but also the people that are expected to service that job market?
If I might, before you, Thamsanqa, I think that one of the biggest challenges is we don't have a diversity of thinking when it comes to problem solving. So when we look at, for example, and I think recently we had a very, very brilliant example of what is possible for South Africa when we get different types of perspectives on an issue. If you look at the way that we managed the COVID pandemic and the manner in which the Department of Health engaged with experts in actual epidemiology, and they engaged with people who are in private sector and businesses and companies, the cohesion that we actually found as a country in being able to respond to this issue, I think is largely because of this idea of recognizing that when you've got people looking at the same problem from different points of view, the solutions are far more practical, they're far more likely to be implemented. What I find is that we have an immense amount of siloed thinking in South Africa. You can see that there's a very limited consultation from the Department of Education about what is needed. Right? So even if I look at the 19 new subjects that have been that are projected to be added to the curriculum, we're speaking about digital technology, we're speaking about consumer studies, but we're not actually speaking about the skills of the future. So I think it's the World Economic Forum that spoke about the top 10 skills of the future. We're not yet introducing the skill set that young people will need to kind of be agnostic to the skill, because it's about what we will need to intervene. So when you're thinking about driverless cars, it's not necessarily that you'll need to know how to code. It's actually potentially that you need to know how to understand a digital language versus the own vernacular that you've got. And I think that that's what we've got to try and do, this idea of getting different minds around a problem and then saying, this is what the total South African solution looks like. And the more of that we do, I think the more successful we are likely to be. And there's enough evidence that every single time we do that, we actually stand a chance to be far more successful at responding to challenges. And I think we have to very urgently take that same approach with employment and education and skills for the future in SA right now.
Thamsanqa, your analysis?
Our approach and our message goes straight to the lecturing team, the lecturers, the professors at colleges and universities. I think that is a type of a team or a group that we do not speak to. We often speak to President Ramaphosa and ask him to change 1, 2, or 3. We will definitely want the President, the Minister of Higher Education, Training and Innovation to make huge investments in workplace training, vacation work for young people. But I would like to speak to lecturers, to speak to deans of students about the nature and the arena of activities that are involved on campuses. That is where we need to make the greatest of change. When I started Sakina, I said we need to change the mindset, we need to change the attitude. Recycling, as we speak today, it's the biggest growing industry. How much of the recycling industry is owned by youth? How much of the recycling industry is taking place on campuses? And how has that evolved and been commercialized? So we need to commercialize it, but also we need to make sure that the private sector provides ecosystems for cooperatives to be able to succeed in moving their recycled goods. But we need to make sure that each and every household, Sakina, is able to earn by sorting whatever we need to recycle at home. I cannot use one garbage bag. We use the same garbage bag every time and over. It is obsolete. We need to change it. Perhaps we need to have 4 or 5 garbage bags. We need one for plastic. We need one for bottle. We need one for used or unused food. We need one for paper and cardboard, so that when they move from the house, you know, and we are guaranteed of a particular and specific income. That is one of the ways we need to be able to maximize on the investment that are made by government, but also to the SETAs. SETAs needs to evolve, and they need to go beyond just financing work that is done for certification. Certification alone is not sufficient. Perhaps that is a change that needs to be done at the departmental level to say that sector education and training authority needs to go beyond certification. We want young people that become champions, that become competent and become skilled at doing a certain type of work, not just knowing about it. And I think moving away from the silo mindset and approach that Ms. Hlophe spoke about is going to help South Africa to become champions. And we cannot be champions at so many things. We've got to choose at least 2, not more than 2 areas where we want to focus. Is it mining? Is it agriculture? Those 2 can make South Africa to move from being an underdeveloped country to being a developed country in a period of 7 years. That's what I believe.
And I think it is so important that we actually have further discussions on these matters, because I think the points that both of you raise are so critical in terms of trying to reinvent where we are and how we move forward in this space, because something needs to be done, and it needs to be done differently. We can't continue on the same beaten track that is clearly off track. So we need to change something and change it drastically. And I'm hoping that we will have opportunity to have further discussions. I'd love to have the 2 of you back to bring in the SETA component that you speak about, Thamsanqa, because the SETAs themselves are also bound in that silo mentality. And one has to often ask, so what exactly are the SETAs doing? And I remember facilitating a discussion for SALGA where someone was actually talking about precisely that, the SETAs, what they have, the money at their disposal, and how perhaps it is not being optimally utilized. But I'm hoping that we will have a follow-up discussion and maybe a bit of a round table around these matters so that we can find a way forward. But thank you so much for your time this morning. And those were the strategy director, I should say, at Yellowwood, Ntombizamasala Hlophe, and chairperson for SA Council for Graduates, Thamsanqa Maqubela, discussing challenges, opportunities, and of course possible alternatives in the South African job markets, looking at new graduates entering the job market and some of the challenges that they are facing even then, and also the unemployment and weak economy.